The crystal chandeliers of the Meridian Club cast golden light across white tablecloths as Vivian Hart balanced 3 plates along her left arm. She had worked at this restaurant for 2 years, and the weight of fine china no longer bothered her. What did bother her were customers like the man at table 7, who snapped his fingers whenever he needed something. Gregory Ashford sat with his son James and 2 business associates, discussing a land development project in voices that carried across the dining room. Vivian had served them before. Gregory always left a minimal tip and treated the staff like furniture that occasionally moved. "Miss," Gregory called out, not bothering to look up from his phone. "Another scotch. The expensive one, not whatever cheap substitute you brought. Last time." Vivian approached the table with her practiced smile. "Of course, sir. That was actually a 30-year Macallan. But I'll bring you the same." Gregory finally looked at her, his eyes cold. "Are you correcting me?" "Just confirming your order, sir." Vivian kept her voice level. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Dad, she's just doing her job." "My son thinks everyone deserves a participation trophy," Gregory said to his associates, who laughed dutifully. He turned back to Vivian. "Tell me something. Do they teach geography in public schools anymore? Or is that too difficult?" Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. "They do teach geography, sir." "Really? Because I was just explaining to my colleagues here about my new resort development in the Maldives, and I wonder if someone like you would even know where that is." Gregory leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. "Go ahead. Impress us." "Where are the Maldives?" The nearby tables had gone quiet. Vivian noticed Rita, her manager, watching from across the room with concern. James put his hand on his father's arm, but Gregory shook it off. "The Maldives are in the Indian Ocean," Vivian said quietly. "Southwest of India and Sri Lanka." "Lucky. Guess?" Gregory said, waving his hand dismissively. "Anyone could know that much. But tell me, since you're so knowledgeable, what's the capital?" Vivian's jaw tightened. She had dealt with difficult customers before. But something about Gregory's tone, the way he performed his cruelty for an audience, made her anger simmer. She thought about walking away, about getting Rita to handle this table. But then she remembered the textbooks on her kitchen table, the student loans, the late nights studying after her shifts ended at midnight. "Malé," she answered. "The capital is Malé, located on the North Malay Atoll." One of Gregory's associates raised his eyebrows, but Gregory continued. "Fine. You memorized some facts. But do you know anything actually useful about the place? Do you understand what makes it valuable for development?" This was the moment Vivian should have excused herself. This was the moment she should have smiled, politely, and retreated to the kitchen. Instead, she met Gregory's gaze directly. "I know it's one of the lowest-lying countries in the world," Vivian said, her voice steady and clear. "The average ground level is about 4 feet above sea level, with the highest point being less than 8 feet. I know that rising sea levels pose an existential threat to the entire nation, and that many scientists predict significant portions of the islands could be uninhabitable within 50 years due to climate change." The table had gone silent. James was staring at her with obvious surprise. Vivian continued, her words flowing with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours studying. "I know the coral reefs that protect the islands are dying due to ocean acidification and warming waters, which means increased erosion and storm damage. I know the government has been buying land in other countries as a potential relocation site for their population. And I know that any major resort development would need to account for these environmental factors, including the carbon footprint of construction, the impact on local ecosystems, and the long-term viability of infrastructure in a place that might not exist in its current form by the end of the century." Gregory's face had gone red. His associates exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I also know," Vivian added, her voice softer now but no less firm, that the local population has concerns about overdevelopment, displacing traditional fishing communities, and destroying the natural beauty that makes the Maldives attractive in the first place. So yes, sir, I do know some things that are actually useful about the place. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour, though it was probably only seconds. Then someone at a nearby table began to clap. Others joined in, a scattered applause that made Vivian's face flush, though this time with embarrassment rather than anger. Rita appeared at Vivian's elbow. "Is everything all right here?" "Your waitress was just giving us an uninvited lecture," Gregory said, his voice tight with anger. "I want to speak to the owner." "I am the manager," Rita said calmly. "And from what I heard, Vivian was answering your questions." Accurately, from the sound of it. James stood up abruptly. "Dad, can I talk to you outside?" "Sit down," Gregory snapped. He pointed a finger at Vivian. "You have no idea who you're talking to. I could buy this restaurant and fire every person in it without noticing the money leave my account." "I'm sure you could, sir," Vivian said quietly. "Your scotch will be right out." She turned and walked toward the bar, her hands shaking slightly. Behind her, she heard James's voice, angry and urgent, arguing with his father in harsh whispers. Several diners smiled at her as she passed. One woman, elegantly dressed and sitting alone, raised her wine glass in a small salute. At the bar, Vivian gripped the edge of the counter and took a deep breath. She had probably just cost herself this job. The bills on her refrigerator flashed through her mind, along with the textbook she needed to buy for next semester's marine biology course. But she had told the truth, and somehow that felt worth it. The scotch sat on Vivian's tray, amber liquid catching the light. She had been standing at the bar for 3 minutes, gathering her courage to return to table 7. Rita appeared beside her, arms crossed, watching the Ashford table with narrowed eyes. "You don't have to go back there," Rita said. "I can have Thomas take over." "No." Vivian picked up the tray. "I can handle it." "I know you can. That's not what I'm worried about." Rita touched her arm gently. "Vivian, that man is Gregory Ashford. He owns half the commercial real estate in this city. If he wants to make trouble, then he'll make trouble, whether I serve him his scotch or not." Vivian managed a weak smile. "Besides, I've dealt with worse." That wasn't entirely true, but she appreciated Rita's concern. She crossed the dining room with her head high, aware that several tables were still watching. The woman who had raised her glass earlier caught her eye and mouthed, "Well done." When Vivian reached table 7, she found the atmosphere had shifted. James sat rigid in his chair, his face flushed. Gregory's 2 associates were looking everywhere, except at their host, and Gregory himself sat with his jaw clenched, staring at his phone. "Your scotch, sir." Vivian placed the glass carefully in front of him. Gregory didn't acknowledge her. James, however, looked up. "Thank you, and I apologize for my father's behavior. It was completely inappropriate." "Don't apologize for me," Gregory muttered, still not looking up. One of the associates, a thin man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "Actually, what you said about the Maldives was quite insightful, miss. We've been trying to tell Gregory that the environmental assessment is crucial for this project." "Robert, we're not discussing business with the help," Gregory said sharply. "The help just knows more about your investment site than you do," James shot back. "Maybe you should listen." The tension at the table crackled like electricity. Vivian began to step away, but Robert spoke again. "Excuse me, miss. You mentioned ocean acidification and coral reef death. We've had consultants telling us the reefs are stable. Do you have reason to believe otherwise?" Vivian hesitated. This was dangerous territory. These men were discussing what was probably a multi-million-dollar project, and she was a waitress who happened to study environmental science. But the question was genuine, and Robert's expression showed real concern. The Maldives Marine Research Institute published a study 8 months ago, Vivian said carefully. They found that 73% of the coral reefs showed significant bleaching, and the recovery rate was far below historical norms. The research is publicly available online. Robert pulled out his phone and began typing. The other associate, a younger man with glasses, leaned forward. Did the study mention specific atolls? The North and South Malay atolls were among the hardest hit, Vivian replied. Those are the most developed areas for tourism. Gregory slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. Enough! I don't need a geography lesson from someone who serves food for a living. Dad, stop it, James said, his voice hard. Just stop. You want to know what I do for a living, Mr. Ashford? Vivian felt something break loose inside her. 2 years of swallowed pride and forced smiles finally reaching their limit. I work here 40 hours a week. Then I go home and study for my degree in environmental science at the university. I'm specializing in coastal ecosystem management and climate change adaptation. Last semester, I wrote my thesis proposal on sustainable development in low-lying island nations, with a focus on the Maldives. She watched Gregory's face as she continued. I worked this job because my father died when I was 19 and left my mother with medical bills we're still paying off. I work this job because scholarships don't cover rent and groceries. I work this job because I'm going to graduate next spring and get a position where I can actually help places like the Maldives survive what's coming. So no, sir, I don't just serve food for a living. I serve food so I can learn how to save the places you want to exploit. The dining room had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed to have stopped. Vivian realized she was breathing hard, her hands clenched at her sides. Robert was staring at her with something like awe. You're graduating next spring? With a degree in environmental science? That's the plan, Vivian said, suddenly exhausted. Do you have a job lined up? Robert, what are you doing? Gregory's voice was dangerous. Saving your investment, possibly, Robert said, not taking his eyes off Vivian, and maybe finding someone who actually knows what they're talking about. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. My firm does environmental impact assessments for major development projects. We're always looking for qualified people, especially ones with your specific knowledge base. Vivian took the card with shaking hands. Robert Chen, Senior Partner, Chen Environmental Consulting. I appreciate that, but I don't have my degree yet, Vivian said. We have an internship program that converts to full-time employment upon graduation, Robert said. The pay is competitive, very competitive, and we need someone for a project in the Indian Ocean region. He glanced pointedly at Gregory. Someone who understands the real challenges, not just the profit projections. James was smiling now, a genuine expression that transformed his face. That's perfect. See, Dad? Everything works out. This is ridiculous, Gregory said, but his voice had lost its edge. He looked deflated, an old man who had just been outmaneuvered at his own table. The younger associate spoke up for the first time. Actually, Mr. Ashford, this might be exactly what we need. The board has been concerned about the environmental review. If we bring in fresh expertise, someone with academic credentials and regional knowledge, it could address a lot of their questions. Gregory finally looked at Vivian, really looked at her, for the first time that evening. What she saw in his eyes wasn't quite remorse, but something close to it. Recognition, perhaps. An acknowledgement that he had misjudged badly. You really study this stuff? He asked, his voice quiet. Every night after work, Vivian replied. Usually, until about 3 in the morning. Gregory was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone at the table. He stood up and extended his hand. I was rude to you, he said. Inexcusably rude and wrong. I apologize. Vivian stared at his hand, then at his face. The arrogance was still there, ingrained too deeply to ever fully disappear. But there was something else now, too. A crack in the armor. She shook his hand. Apology accepted. Robert, set up an interview, Gregory said, sitting back down. If she's as good as she sounds, we need her on this project. And if she's better, then the consultants we've been paying, I want to know why we're still paying them. Robert grinned. I'll have my assistant call you tomorrow. He looked at Vivian. That is, if you're interested. Vivian looked down at the business card in her hand, then at the four men at the table, then at Rita standing near the kitchen with her hand over her mouth. She thought about her apartment with its cracked ceiling and temperamental heating. She thought about her mother's medical bills. She thought about the stack of textbooks on sustainable development that she'd bought used and highlighted until the pages were more yellow than white. I'm interested, she said. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Vivian moved through her remaining tables on autopilot, her mind spinning with the weight of Robert Chen's business card in her apron pocket. She caught fragments of conversation from Table 7 as she passed. Gregory's associates were now engaged in an animated discussion about environmental assessments, and James kept glancing her way with an apologetic smile. When the Ashford party finally prepared to leave, Gregory asked Rita to send Vivian over one last time. Her stomach tightened as she approached, uncertain what to expect. I want you to have this, Gregory said, sliding an envelope across the table. It's not a bribe or an attempt to influence anything. Consider it an apology that actually cost me something. Vivian opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a check for $5,000. Mr. Ashford, I can't accept this, she said, trying to hand it back. You can, and you will, Gregory said firmly. I humiliated you in public because I made assumptions about who you were based on what you do to pay your bills. That was wrong. The money won't erase what I did, but maybe it'll help with those medical bills you mentioned. James stepped forward. My father isn't usually this self-aware. I'd take it before he changes his mind. Despite everything, Vivian found herself smiling. Thank you, Mr. Ashford. This means more than you know. Call me Gregory, he said. And for the first time that evening, his expression was genuinely warm. And I expect to see you at Robert's office. Don't make me look stupid for agreeing to this. After they left, Rita pulled Vivian into the kitchen, where the entire staff had apparently been listening to the drama unfold. Girl, do you know what just happened? Rita's eyes were shining. You just landed a job interview with one of the biggest environmental consulting firms in the country. I know, Vivian said, still feeling dazed. I can't believe it. I can, said Marcus, the head chef who had worked at the Meridian Club for 15 years. I've watched you study in the break room for 2 years. You're the smartest person in this building. And it's about time someone with money figured that out. The celebration was interrupted by Rita's phone buzzing. She looked at the screen and her eyebrows shot up. Vivian, you need to see this. She turned her phone around. The woman who had been dining alone, the one who had raised her glass to Vivian, had posted about the evening on social media. The post was already going viral. Watched a billionaire mock a waitress's intelligence tonight at the Meridian Club. Then watched that same waitress school him on climate science, coastal erosion, and the environmental impact of his own investment project. She's studying environmental science while working full-time to pay off her family's medical debt. Real. Knowledge doesn't care about your tax bracket. This woman is going places. The post had thousands of shares and comments. Several news outlets had already reached out to the woman for more details. Oh no, Vivian breathed. This is going to be everywhere. Is that a bad thing? Rita asked gently. Vivian thought about it. Part of her wanted to hide, to keep her head down and avoid attention. But another part, the part that had stood up to Gregory Ashford in a room full of wealthy diners, felt something different. Pride, maybe. Or just the simple satisfaction of being seen for who she really was. I guess we'll find out, she said. The interview with Chen Environmental Consulting happened 3 days later. Robert Chen's office was in a gleaming tower downtown, all glass and polished steel. Vivian wore her only suit, bought secondhand for a career fair she'd attended last year. Robert greeted her personally, along with two other senior consultants. The interview lasted 2 hours. They asked her about coral reef ecosystems, sustainable tourism practices, carbon offset strategies, and community engagement in development projects. Every question she answered led to 3 more, each one deeper and more complex than the last. When it was over, Robert walked her to the elevator. "You know the Maldives project isn't just about saving Gregory's investment," he said. "If we do this right, we can create a model for sustainable development in vulnerable coastal regions. We can prove that economic growth and environmental protection aren't mutually exclusive." "That's what I've always believed," Vivian said. "It's why I chose this field." "The job is yours if you want it," Robert said. "Internship starts immediately, full-time position upon graduation. We'll work around your class schedule. Starting salary after graduation is $75,000, with benefits and opportunities for advancement." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. "I want it. Thank you." "Don't thank me. You earned this." Robert smiled. "Gregory might have opened the door, but you're the one who proved you belonged on the other side of it." 3 months later, Vivian sat in a conference room with Robert, Gregory, James, and a team of environmental specialists. Spread across the table were revised plans for the Maldives resort project, plans that she had helped design. The development was smaller now, more focused, with extensive coral restoration initiatives, renewable energy systems, and partnerships with local communities. "The board approved it," Gregory announced. "All of it. They said it's the most forward-thinking resort proposal they've ever seen." He looked at Vivian. "They particularly like the sustainability advisor we brought in. Apparently she knows what she's talking about." "Careful, Dad," James said, grinning. "That almost sounded like a compliment." "It was a compliment," Gregory said gruffly. He turned to Vivian. "I've been thinking about that night at the restaurant, about how close I came to missing this opportunity, because I couldn't see past my own prejudices." "We all make mistakes," Vivian said diplomatically. "Some mistakes are more expensive than others," Gregory replied. "And some teach us more than we wanted to learn." He paused, then added, "I've decided to fund a scholarship at your university. Full tuition, room and board for students from low-income families studying environmental science. I'm calling it the Hart Scholarship." Vivian stared at him, speechless. "Don't get emotional on me," Gregory said, but his eyes were soft. "Just promise me one thing. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small because of the work you do to survive. What you do doesn't define who you are. Who you are defines everything else." Later, after the meeting ended and everyone else had left, James caught up with Vivian in the hallway. "I wanted to apologize again for my father," he said. "Not just for that night, but for all the nights before it. All the times he treated people like they didn't matter because they weren't in his tax bracket." "He's changing," Vivian said. "People can change." "Because of you," James said. "You showed him something he needed to see. That intelligence, knowledge, and worth aren't distributed according to wealth. That the person serving your dinner might be smarter than everyone at the table combined." Vivian smiled. "I was just answering questions about geography." "You were doing a lot more than that," James said seriously. "You were standing up for every person who's been dismissed or overlooked because of where they came from or what job they had to take to survive. That matters more than you know." 6 months later, Vivian graduated summa cum laude. Her mother sat in the front row, healthy now. The medical bills finally paid off. Rita and Marcus came, along with half the staff from the Meridian Club. Robert. Chen was there with several colleagues from the consulting firm. And in the back row, looking slightly uncomfortable in the sea of proud families, sat Gregory and James Ashford. After the ceremony, Gregory approached her with an envelope. "Not another check," Vivian said, laughing. "Just a letter," Gregory said, "from the Maldivian government. They want you to consult on their national climate adaptation strategy. Robert's firm is partnering with them, and they specifically requested you." Vivian opened the letter with trembling hands. It was real. An official request for her expertise, her knowledge, her voice in shaping the future of a nation facing existential threats. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Gregory said simply. "Say yes to every opportunity that comes your way. You've earned every single one of them." As Vivian looked around at the faces of people who had supported her, challenged her, and believed in her, she felt something shift inside her chest. The weight she'd been carrying for years, the weight of worry, of doubt, of feeling like she had to constantly prove her worth, finally lifted. She thought about that night at the Meridian Club, about the moment she'd chosen to speak up instead of staying silent, about how one choice, one moment of refusing to be diminished, had changed the trajectory of her entire life. "I have a confession," Gregory said quietly. "That night at the restaurant wasn't the first time I'd been cruel to someone who didn't deserve it, but it was the last time. You taught me that the measure of a person has nothing to do with their job title or bank balance. It has everything to do with what they know, what they care about, and what they're willing to fight for." Vivian met his eyes. "Thank you for learning that lesson. Not everyone does." "Thank you for teaching it," Gregory replied, "even though I made you work way too hard for it." As the sun set over the university campus, Vivian stood with her diploma in one hand and her future spread out before her like an ocean, vast, deep, and full of possibilities she'd once thought were reserved for other people. People who didn't have to work nights to pay for their dreams. People who'd never been dismissed or underestimated. But she'd learned something those people might never know. The view from the bottom, the climb from being overlooked to being essential, gave her a perspective that couldn't be bought or inherited. It gave her empathy, resilience, and an unshakable understanding of what really mattered. She'd been tested by a man who thought wealth meant wisdom, and she'd proven that knowledge belonged to anyone willing to work for it. The geography lesson had taught them both something important, and the whole world was about to benefit from what they'd learned. The end.